Every episode celebrates original content written by real people who experience real emotions. I'm Rayanne Thorn Krueger. Welcome to Real Words. I cannot tell you how excited I am about my guest today. She goes by LGO, and if you know her, you can call her Laura, or if you, I sometimes like to call her Glow. I don't even know, I don't know why. It just kind of fits with LGO. Glow. Laura Gassner Otting. Thank you, Laura, for joining me today on Real Words. What a pleasure.
I am so excited to be here. I've been a fan of yours since like 2015, I think. So
You are so sweet. I'm a huge fan of yours, and to prove that, I even have a 2015 copy
wow.
of Mission Driven, and then I have, of course, we have Limitless, amazing book, and your latest Wonderhell. We're going to get into these, but
Wow.
first, give us a brief intro. I know it's not brief. It's not going to be brief, and it shouldn't be brief. What an honor to have you here on Real Words. Thank you for joining me today. Take it away.
Yeah. So, okay. My name is Laura Gassner Otting, and I am fascinated by the question of why success doesn't bring happiness. And both of my last two books are sort of hovering around that subject in different ways, but it's really based on the fact that I had been given a definition of success that I thought I was going to follow, right? Like go to school, get the right job, go to law school, become a lawyer, meet the right man, like 2.5 kids, the whole thing. And then one day I realized that everyone else's definition of success filled all of the boxes, but left me empty. And so through time in the Clinton White House, through working at one of the best search firms in the business, through founding, running, and finally selling my own, and then eventually in my job as an author and a speaker, I have been working very hard to solve this question.
Well, I love, as I was just cruising through your books, which I've read, the one thing that popped out at me was, and I don't know why it didn't pop out at me before, probably because Real Words is a big idea. It is a big idea. So the audacity of a big idea, what is that, and where did that come from?
So, it's interesting. I think that exact phrasing came from when I was trying to rewrite my bio. And I was working with somebody who was trying to capture who I am and sort of what is the essence of what I like to do. And I said, there's nothing that's more exciting to me than when somebody has this gigantic, big, hairy, crazy goal and they don't know how to do it and they're not even sure if they can, but they say it to you in a way that they almost whisper it because they have such reverence for the work that it will take to make it happen. And just the audacity to dream that we can be more, that we can think more, that we can achieve more, that what is current day status quo doesn't have to be destiny. To me, that's like the very basis of who we are as evolving humans, that we are always constantly growing and changing and iterating and innovating. And so I'm in love both with the big idea, but also the audaciousness that it takes to even have one and to believe that it's something that is there for you.
I've run into this so many times where I feel other people put their ideas on me about how to approach a big idea. And by that, I mean, you can never do this. It's like that negative script that we have for ourselves. People who should be our biggest supporters, even though they're not saying those words, sometimes I feel like, oh, they're saying how audacious of you to think that you can do this on top of everything else you've done. So what do you say to people that you think should be your biggest fans?
Well, I think we have to remember who those people are, right? So some of them love us and they don't want to see us get hurt. And,
True.
Like when I told my parents I was dropping out of law school and joining this campaign of a dude from a tiny southern state who was running for president against George H.W. Bush, who had just won Desert Storm, 91% approval rating, they were like, you're insane, right? When I told them I was leaving the White House to go work at a search firm, they were like, what the hell is search? Like, what's that? When I told them I was leaving the search firm to found my own company, it's like at each one of these moments, my parents thought I was crazy because they have been pre-programmed to think security, safety, de-risk, And also, by the way, the last time Laura lived in the same house with us, she brought the car back late for curfew with the radio turned all the way up and the gas turned all the way down. Like, I didn't have a full frontal lobe. So they want to get in between me and harm, right? So it's not that these people don't believe in us. They love us, but they don't really know us, right? Like, my parents, I'm 53 years old. My parents don't know what I'm capable of anymore. And they have completely backwards ideas of who I should be. So number one, they may love us. Number two, they might be jealous of us, right? There's all these people in our lives who see our rise only through the lens of their own stagnation. And they're like smiles in the front and knives in the back. And they're like, I love that for you, right? I mean, they say these things that are like a little passive aggressive or maybe sometimes aggressive, but it's very clear that they do not have enough security and enough confidence to be excited for you, because all it does is call into question the decisions that they've made or the actions or the inactions of their own life. So either they love you or they're jealous of you. And then there are the third bunch. And I think this third bunch is almost the most diabolical, because these are like the random people that you run into at the coffee shop and you're like, here's my big idea. And they're like, oh no, you can't do that. That's too scary. And what they really mean is, I can't do that. I'm too scared. But what happens is that the minute something goes wrong, the minute like the client says, no, we don't get the funding, or, like the website isn't coming together right, or whatever the thing is that we want to do, it like that little, you can't do that, that's too scary seed that we thought we just washed out of our brain, we realize has actually implanted, and it's like sprouting weeds, and all of a sudden it becomes this cancer on our confidence. And so I think it's really important to think about who these people are who are handing you their opinions, and decide, like, do they know me? Do they know who I am today and what I'm capable of? Do I actually care about their opinions? Do I need their opinions? Would I want their praise? If I don't, why am I taking their criticism, right? And just to make sure that we're actually putting them in perspective of where they actually belong. Because I think what happens is we give all of these people equal volume in our brain, and they all don't deserve it. That's why I say we shouldn't give votes in our lives to people who shouldn't even have voices. But the problem is we give all of these people voices.
They take up space, and we need to remember that we're the owner of that space, and we can decide if it's no longer for rent or for sale.
Yeah, and the problem is, like, they take up space, and we don't even realize they take up space until things start to go wrong. And then once things start to go wrong, we're like, oh, look, they've been here all along. And then because things are going wrong, we don't have any defense mechanisms to push them out. I just did this really fascinating thing. I don't know if you've ever done this. I know you're from California, so this is like a little hippy dippy sort of California thing. But I went to this meditation, and it's this like sound bath type experience where there's a group of 3 of you, and you have one person in each ear, and they get close enough to you, like they're going to tell you state secrets. And for one full minute, 60 seconds, they just talk in your ear at the same exact time and tell you all kinds of amazing things about you. So like, Rayanne, you're so beautiful. You're so smart. I love how you're able to put these ideas together. You're such a good communicator. And the way that you network with people really shows the depth of your relationship, and on and on and on. And what's fascinating about it is because it's happening at the same exact time, you don't have any defenses. Like, you can't deflect and demur and like we normally do when we get a compliment. So you're forced, because if you're pushing away one, you're hearing the other. Like, you're forced to be stuck with it and absorb the fact that somebody thinks you're awesome. And it was really uncomfortable, and also one of the greatest things I've ever done in my life. So I think we take all these voices and we have to like push the other ones in.
That's really interesting. I did do a meditation type thing where I stood like right close to a woman, and we just stared at each other. No words. You just stare at each other. And we were in a circle, 2 circles that circled around each other, and we would do that for a minute and then go to the next woman. And I cried every single time. And eventually you're holding hands with that person as soon as you get to them, such it's like powerful
a deeply
experience.
Intimate experience I'm a raging introvert. And so for me, that was like, I don't know, like, and by the end, like, we did a thing also where you held hands. And by the end, I was like, I don't even know you, but I feel like I need to hug you because this is so intimate. And yet we're just holding hands. And I just want to like wrap my arms around you.
So much. So now that you're a Wall Street Journal best-selling author and a media personality appearing on all these news shows and morning shows,
crazy.
Are your parents still worried about you and your path?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've been married for 26 years. I have two grown sons that are in great colleges. I'm, by all measures, a successful human. And yet, every time I like raise some idea balloon, my parents are always like, well, here's all the things that could go wrong. And I'm like, I think my track record shows, but
Right.
like, I think that here's the thing, like, identity is not a fixed trait. Like, we can continue to grow and to change. And, I like to joke around that as a postmenopausal woman, I'm still finding my final form, right? Like,
Sure.
we get to keep changing and growing. We have all these
Right.
off ramps and on ramps in life. But I think there are people who meet us at certain moments of our life, and we are forever that person. Like, you are forever the high school graduate that your parents knew, or you are forever and it's usually a lot of times I find we are frozen as the identity of the worst version of ourselves, right? Like the one
Absolutely.
that they wanted to protect, the one that was going through a problem, the one that because they don't want that to happen again. And so it's almost like this ballast, right? This drag on your momentum to have people who are constantly reminding you of your worst. And so like, I can't get rid of my parents, right? I don't want to get rid of my
Right.
parents.
Right.
But what I do instead is I don't tell them about the ideas when they're idea balloons. Like, I kind of bring them in a little bit later. Like, let me tell you about the business I started 6 months ago, right? Like,
Right.
I bring them in late because it's like when you're pregnant and you're like, I'm going to name my baby whatever. People are like, that's a terrible name. Let me tell you about my ex-boyfriend. Let me tell you about the girl who bullied me in high
Yeah.
school.
Right.
But when you
Right.
hand them your baby and you're like, here's my baby and here's her name, nobody's going to be like, oh, that's the worst name ever, right? Like, so I feel like I wait for the baby to be born now before I tell some of those people that either love me or hate me or, are scared where I'm going and what I'm doing, because then it's easier for them to conceptualize and understand that you're not crazy,
Right.
that you're not naive.
The wisdom that comes to us after so many years. So
Yes.
tell me about Mission Driven. This is your book, Mission Driven,
I wrote it in
and
2007.
it's 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 been here for a while,
It's
right? It's been here for a while, but I am interested to know: has this been a foundation for you? Has this book been? I mean, being purpose driven, mission driven, tends to change what we're looking for,
Yes.
right? The it changes the journey, but it also changes the destination.
Yes.
So, how have you kept a hold of this? Because this is, I mean, it's very much written for nonprofit individuals, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, tell me how that has stayed with you now that you are very much making a profit from your success, right? And that profit could be internal. That profit could be you get to call your own shots now. You're not a slave to uh, showing up at the office every morning at 8 o'clock, and it feels like you are writing that script for Laura. So how have you maintained this?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So, Mission Driven was a book that I wrote because Kaplan Publishing called me in 2007 and said, we're doing a series of books about changing your career. One's about going into nursing, one's about going into teaching, and one's about going into nonprofits. At the time, I was running an executive search firm that was doing specifically nonprofit executive search. And when they called me, my first reaction was like, my brother-in-law's name is John, and he likes to do a lot of crank calls. And I was like, oh, F you, John. And I literally hung up the phone. And they called me back and they're like, hi, no, this is really us. And we're calling. And we saw a blog post you wrote online about transitioning from corporate to nonprofit work. And it seems like you know what you're talking about. And I was like, okay. And they basically were like, here's $20,000. We need 60,000 words in 6 months. Go. Now, thank God I actually knew what I was talking about. And I
Right.
spent the last 15 years doing this because they found a 3-paragraph blog post that I wrote and I edited and I put on my own website. Okay. I
Right.
mean,
Thank
not
goodness.
exactly vetted. Okay.
Right.
So thank God I knew what I was talking about. And here's the thing. That executive search firm that did nonprofit executive search, it was a for-profit firm. I've actually, funnily enough, never worked for a nonprofit. I worked in government, but I've always worked in a for-profit. It was for less profit. Obviously, we could have made more money doing searches for Coca-Cola and Hilton hotel chains, and but
Right.
I've always worked for for-profits, but here's what has stuck with me from that. What I realized was purpose, like we get purpose wrong because we think it has to have the words higher or lofty in front of it. Like the only purpose that matters is giving a shirt off your back to a poor kid in need. And the poorer the better, right? Like that is sort of
Right.
the conventional wisdom. But the truth is like everybody has their own purpose. And your purpose may be curing cancer, like awesome. Your purpose also may be making a living wage so that you can get out of debt, so that you can make different decisions than you had to as a child, and your children can make different decisions than you've had to as an adult. Your purpose can be buying a Maserati and a beach house, right? Like everybody's purpose is different. And so for me, what came to me from that is actually not necessarily just like working for a larger purpose, but in fact, that I could be the driver of my own purpose. And I realized in that moment that, well, if this big publishing company could find me because I told everyone I was an expert, well, what else can I do if I tell everyone I'm an expert? Like, what else is out there? And it just made me realize that we're all the masters of our own destiny.
Yes.
We all can decide where we want to be an expert. And like it has never been more democratized, little d democratized, to reach whatever audience you want to reach. Like, do the work, know where you stand about an issue, like have actual data and stories to tell, and then tell people your point of view. That's how you become an expert in it. And everyone's waiting around for permission from somebody else. When in fact, what I realized from that experience is that I gave myself permission to be the expert.
Right. And a writer. I mean, you gave yourself the permission to be a writer. So a blog post, a 3-paragraph blog or article on your website, all of a sudden, now you're an author.
Yeah.
So what made you go from, okay, I did this because I was requested, to doing this because I'm just driven to do that? So why actually become a writer? Why do it?
So, I sold that executive search firm to the team of women who helped me build it. And I had this crisis of identity. Actually, I was the chair of a charity auction, an art auction that benefits a local AIDS research and services organization. And I was standing at this very fancy art auction wearing this very fancy couture gown that was lent to me by one of the fashion sponsors, and this very beautiful diamond necklace lent to me by one of the jewelry sponsors. And I did not want to get on stage because speaking in public is terrifying. And so I didn't. And Janet Wu, who's a local newscaster, got up on stage and she's about to start the auction. And she said, and before we begin the auction, I'd like to thank my dear friend, Laura Gassner Otting, who is the chair of our art auction tonight. And she said, I'd like to thank my dear friend, Laura Gassner Otting, who dedicates her life to philanthropy. And in that moment, I like looked down at my clothing and I looked at my husband who works in the finance sector. And I thought about, she dedicates her life to philanthropy. And I'm like, oh my God, she just lady who lunched me. Like, I'm a lady who lunches. Like, I do not have a job and I'm the chair. And there's nothing wrong with dedicating your life to philanthropy, but it was like one dimension of my world and suddenly become the entire one. So I went home that night, and because I'm a super clever monkey, I bought lauragassnerotting.com and I started writing blog posts about things that were bothering me in the world. And one of those blog posts was about how we don't solve big problems because we're asking the wrong questions. And Tamsin Webster, who I think you know yes. as well, she saw one of those blog posts, and she's the executive producer of TEDx Cambridge. And she called me up and she was like, I think you should do a TEDx on this. And I said, no way. That's terrifying. No, thank you. And my kids were in the backseat, and my kids were like 12 and 14 at the time. And they're like, hey, Mom, don't you always tell us we have to do scary things? And I was like, you know, so 6 weeks later, I'm on the stage. Right. They're like, don't you tell us life starts on the other side of the fear, and if it doesn't challenge, it doesn't change you. And I'm like, you don't pick up your socks, but this you heard. So 6 weeks later, I'm on the stage, like Boston Opera House, 2,600 seats, gold gilded walls, crystal chandeliers. And that took on some attention. And I got offered $1,500 to fly to Boise, Idaho to give a talk. And after 20 years of being in search and consulting and having, 6-month projects with 3-ring binders and 300 pages at the end of every one, I was like, I just go and talk for 45 minutes and then you hand me a check. Tell me more about this job. Yeah. So I started talking to people who spoke, and I started noticing that the people who made real money had books. And what I realized was that I have this book about transitioning from corporate to nonprofit. So for those who know me, I'm the nonprofit gal, which is not what I talk about. And for those who don't know me, they don't know me. So either I have no brand or I have brand confusion. And so I started thinking about, what I learned during those 20 years of search. And out of that, Limitless was born.
Well, it's interesting to me as self-described introvert
Yeah.
that you are, that you would say, how do I do this? How do I expose myself? Because
Well,
there's a lot of vulnerability in writing.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of vulnerability in writing. I think Brene Brown said, you should write from the scars, not the wounds. And so for
I
me,
love that.
I love that. So for me, like writing is my therapy. Like some of the Facebook posts or the newsletters that I put out that get the biggest, like, that go viral, they're everywhere, are the ones that I literally wake up in the morning and I thumb type out like out of a screed of either like joy or
It came from
passion
within.
or anger or pain or whatever it is. It's like it almost has to, like, it's like alien, or has to like come out of my body. And I just write it, and I don't edit it. I just write it and I send, and that's it. And I always joke around that my newsletter is always riddled with typos, because if I go back to reread it, I'll edit it and I'll like
Yeah.
I'll take the
You take the passion out of it. You
Take the
take
and,
the humanity is
yeah.
removed.
And I think my readers read me for that, like the oomph, right? So like but here's the thing. I think this life is a very public life, but I can also be 100% open with like 60% of my life. Right. So I don't often talk about my husband. Like, you don't see pictures of like my house. Like, it's a very, like, there are parts of me that are sort of locked away in private, because there are people in those parts of me that are private people and they don't want
Right.
to be out everywhere. So I respect that. And I also write about stuff that I understand. Like, over the course of the last few years, I've had two very, sort of weird health things. One was I had to do this chemotherapy cream on my
remember.
face. It got all red. I was like the creature from the Black Lagoon.
I
And the
remember.
other one was this super rare autoimmune disease that 800 people in the country have ever had. Now, the creature from the Black Lagoon cream, I just live streamed every day about
You
it, because
did.
but I did that because I've done that before. Like, every 10 years I have to do this cream. So I knew how bad it would get, and I knew where it would end, and I knew that it would be a happy ending.
Yeah.
The autoimmune disease, on the other hand, I didn't really talk about that much. And about 3 months into the remission, I wrote this very deep and personal newsletter about just how close to the bottom of the well I came, right? That I spent nights after night, thinking about the videos I'd need to make for my children, because I wasn't going to be there for the most important days of their life, right? Like, I mean, I was really, and I had friends call me up and say, "Oh my God, Laura, I'm so sorry. I wasn't there for you. I didn't know. How did I miss that?" And I said, "You didn't miss it. I didn't tell anybody." The cream, I knew how that story would end. So I could write from the scars even while I was in the wounds. The autoimmune disease, which I'm now in remission and I'm fine from, I couldn't write from that until I was way into the scars part of it, because I didn't know. And so there's this illusion that I'm 100% open about everything, when in fact I don't know that anybody really is. And I think if that's what they're showing you, that also might be an illusion of a person that they're creating, right? They're like cosplaying this external person.
Right. So it's hard when you're public, when you're a public personality, and there are private things that happen, and my natural inclination is to spill it. Let me tell it all. And so to remember about those other people in my life, that, okay, I got to just back up, and let's let some scars develop first. Let's a few scars develop first, because it is so painful when you're in the throes of that.
It's super painful, and especially if you're somebody who writes as a way to sort of get it out.
Right.
But like, about somewhere in the middle of the pandemic, I cleaned out my office and I found a set of old journals from when I was working in the White House, and I had my first ever real heartbreak. Right, I was dating a guy and he cheated on me, and I wrote in cursive, mind you, pages and pages and pages in this beautiful journal that I bought when I was backpacking in Italy. I like saved it for this thing, and I found it. And Rayanne, if I could just tell you, I didn't know whether I should laugh at the thing or burn the thing. Like,
Right.
It is so overwrought. It is so ridiculous. It is so in cursive, right? Like I wrote it in cursive. I was clearly writing it for somebody else to read, for somebody else to see it. And so,
Right.
I think
They will know when
they
I'm
will know,
gone. They will know
let
my story.
let them know my pain in cursive, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
I mean, it was so ridiculously fake. And I read it and like, so I think I like part of what I love about the title of this, Real Words, right, is that like the words have to be real. They have to be who you are in
Yeah.
that moment. And, I look back on that and when I was talking to my kids about it, I said, that wasn't the real me, but the real me in that moment wanted to be perceived as
Yeah.
somebody so much deeper than she actually was. Like, so it
Right.
is the real me, even though what you read is the real me. The whole
There,
I was
there's
cosplaying this other
Yeah,
person.
but there's therapy in that, right?
Oh
I mean,
yes,
one of the requirements or things that you do, I don't know if you're familiar with the artist's way, but one of the things that you do in the artist's way is the morning
the morning
pages,
pages.
right? The
Yeah.
morning pages of writing 3 words by hand on lined paper or whatever you're most comfortable with, typically in cursive. And as somebody who has written online for 20 years, my handwriting is horrible.
Yes.
But there is something about disposing of that, right? Letting
Yes.
go of those emotions, waking up and saying the neighbor's gardener started at 6:15 today and
Yep.
and I really wanted to sleep until 7:30. Whatever. You get all of that out so that you can open up and expose more. I want to ask you about advice you might give for new writers or somebody who's decided that they want to foray into this life of a writer?
So that's an interesting question. I think that my writing was deeply shaped by growing up in politics. I grew up with sound bites. I grew up with sort of clever turns of phrase that had to be memorable. I grew up with
Right.
it has to be um, personal and evocative and brief, right? What's that expression? Like, be brief, be brilliant, be gone, right? Like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so just being able to land the plane, right? Like, how do you sort of bring it around to the end of a story that like leaves somebody with a thing that they can then carry
Yeah.
forth? So, I would say that at least what my readers like about what I write is that it has this sort of rhythm, but up, 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 but up,
Right.
but up, right? Like it has like a rhythm and it's forward motion, and you each the end of each sentence leads you to want to start the next sentence, right? It sort of carries you through. Um, and that really came from studying great speech writing, great political speech writing. So, I mean, everything from Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" to FDR and the D-Day speech. I mean, there's so many historically great speeches,
Sure.
and just the understanding of this, like being called to something higher. And I think that starts with knowing where you're going to end. Like, I think a lot of writers go in sort of starting to talk about a thing, but they don't know where they want
They
to
don't know
land the
where they're going to
plane.
end up. Yeah.
Right. So, like, if you know where you're going to land the plane, then you can call people to this sort of higher question with this sort of lyrical, poetic, motion driven writing. But you can't do that if you don't know where the tarmac is.
Right. This
At the
the
end.
the the ending shouldn't be a surprise to you as the
Right.
as the author. You should forecast that for yourself.
I
I
find more often than not that when I go back and I edit, like if I'm writing a chapter or a section of a chapter, more often than not, I end up taking the entire like last paragraph and moving it up to the first paragraph and then deleting whatever the first paragraph was. Like, there's just a lot of throat clearing, I think, that has
yeah,
to happen sometimes.
I love that. That's great advice. I want to read you something that I'm part of a group, Women in Marketing, on Facebook, right? And these women help each other out. They ask for advice. They tell stories. This just came in yesterday, and I mean it fits perfectly for what Real Words is all
Yeah.
about. Hello, ladies. A bit of a vulnerable post, and this was posted anonymously. Although I am posting anonymously, I explored ChatGPT and other AI tools about a year ago to help with copywriting for social media. Since then I've become heavily reliant on it, and I hate it. I've noticed my writer's block is worse than ever, and I feel like the least creative person in the world. Any tips on how I can improve my writing and creativity so I can stop relying on AI? Ugh, my heart, when I read that, I went, oh, this is why you don't rely on it. Don't even start. Don't even start. I know it's good
It's true.
for ideation but she's also said later in commenting that it kind of squashed her idea making also. So when we talk about the audacity of the big idea, I'm so concerned about our loss for creativity and the way that we as humans, those of us who are good communicators, those who rely on writing, content creation, art, those of us who create art, photographers, painters, sculptors, musicians, playwrights, screenwriters, all of us that create art. I'm very concerned about the loss of creativity. And this post just like went right, it was like a bullet hole right to my heart because it's what I've been not fearing. I don't fear that
It's what you've
jobs
been
are, my
predicting.
job's going to be taken away. My fear has been that we will lose, that future generations will lose the ability to create on their own. Do you think there's a risk of this?
I think there's a huge risk of that. I always say it's not that people aren't good writers, people aren't good thinkers. And I think we've gotten very lazy about how we think, how we spend time being uncomfortable in our brain. Right? To go back to Tamsin Webster, when she was training me she was coaching me for TEDx Cambridge, she said, like, you don't want to memorize the talk, you want to internalize the talk. And that means if you are off your notes and you are
Right.
trying to remember the talk and you come up to a line that you don't remember, don't just go right to the page. Like, wait for a couple minutes and try to let your brain go back into the file cabinet in your brain and find it. Because by the act of it going in and finding that thing, it actually puts it in a place for you to remember. And so it was forcing me to think about the talk as opposed to just memorize the lines.
Yeah, having it
And
be rote, having it be internal, that it is something you live. You
totally different
developed it.
things.
You can find it. Right.
Exactly. So this process of, like, okay, be uncomfortable and spend a little time not knowing what comes next until you know what comes next. I think the idea of just going straight to ChatGPT. Like, I sat in on my younger son's a freshman in college, and I went to one of his art history classes before I picked him up for Thanksgiving, and it was one of these, like, super arcane, very, like, modern, cutting edge, like, performance art type things. And it's like, I have no idea who these artists are and why doing this one thing where they stand, like, naked in a square and bark is, like, art. Like, I don't get it. Right. So, like, I literally went to ChatGPT and I'm like, why is blah, 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 blah art? And it told me, it helped me. Right. Like, I used
Yeah.
it to study.
Yeah. Well, it's like
Fine.
Google. I mean, you could have
Yeah,
found it on Google.
totally.
It just aggregated everything
Exactly. I
for
was like,
you
how do
in
you
one
compare this
space.
person and this person
Yeah.
and that person? Because I knew the lecture was going to be about the three. So it just, honestly, it's not like I raised my hand in class and I'm like, I know things. It just, like, when we were driving home, I said, so I went to ChatGPT and and this is what I think is pretty cool. So it enabled a conversation. But I think every time I see one of our peers, a writer, a thinker, a creative, send out a newsletter about, like, the 10 ways ChatGPT is saving them time, it's like an angel loses its wings. You know what I mean? Like, it just
It really
kills
is.
me.
It really
It
is.
kills me.
It kills me too.
It's awful. So, I mean, my advice to this woman would be, like, go outside without an internet connection and a journal and a pencil and be really uncomfortable with the gray, static nothingness in your brain for days and days and days until your brain remembers that it actually does the thing that it used to do. But I think it's like put down the bottle, but, walk away.
Walk away.
I think it's the same thing. And if you can't just do that on your own, then get a couple of other people, 2, 3, 4, and meet at a coffee shop for an hour and put your phones away and just bat ideas back and forth. And just that iterative process, I think, will be helpful. But I think it is not that this technology is bad. It's that we are not allowing ourselves to be uncomfortable in the unknowing anymore, so that we go right to the technology. We go for that quick high.
Well,
I think that's the problem.
There's this theory that I came up with when my previous life. I was a dental assistant, and I worked for children's dentistry. And my dentist, when he was in a hurry, even though I was doing a process that required a specific amount of time, right? He would do this. He would give me the hurry hand. right? So I would talk to him after and I'd say, it doesn't matter if you give me the hurry hand. There is a certain amount of time required. So give your brain, put the hurry hand away. You may have a deadline. Yeah, guess what? You're going to probably have to rewrite that chat GPT, whatever it produced for you,
Yeah.
right? You're going to have to rewrite it, and it's going to take more time and utilize different types of skills. Go back to being creative.
Yeah.
Stop using it. Like you said, go outside, sit with friends, brainstorm, get inspiration from anything and start writing it down.
Yes.
Keep notes. I mean, I remember when I was blogging every day, 650 words every day. I had this Ernest Hemingway mindset. You've got to do it at least 500 words every day.
Yep.
Inspiration was there everywhere.
Everywhere.
I had my notes section open on my phone. I was boom, 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 boom. Inspiration was everywhere. The minute you say, I've got writer's block or I need help, you've just closed that door. You've closed that door that is there. If you're a writer, it's there.
Absolutely. And I think we have to also remember that like some of those blog posts are going to be turds, right? Like they're not all going to be amazing. Some of them are going to be stinkers and some of them are going to be brilliant. And we don't know which ones are which. I mean, I wrote a blog post in 10 minutes in the back of a cab in New York City about like 20 ways to be a superhero at your summer internship. That has gotten like 300,000 views on LinkedIn.
That's amazing.
I have had other blog posts that I have worked on for weeks that have gotten like 6 views. And most of those were me clicking a refresh to see if it actually was up because nobody was reading it. So like, we just don't know how some of our ideas will resonate. We don't know what's going to be out there. And you know, everyone's always like, I get my best ideas in the shower. I get my best ideas on a run. And it's like, no, you don't. That's the only place you get your ideas because you're not allowing yourself to get ideas anywhere else because you're so busy with the hurry hand all the time.
Right. The hurry hand is in your face.
Absolutely.
And you just can't, you got to give yourself the space to think.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I just conceptualized my next book like 2 weeks ago. And not that I was looking for an idea for my next book. I wasn't at all. Like I've long said, I'm never writing another book again. And all of a sudden I was driving in the car and literally into my brain popped greatness, how to spot it and stoke it in ourselves and those that matter most. Woo. Okay, where did that come from? It came from 3 nights earlier. I was at my son's college. I promise I'm not like stalking him, but it's just 2 stores.
You're a mama. You're a mama.
I am.
You're allowed.
So we went, he was stage managing a play. We went to the play and there was this like funny, like it was like a comedy. And the comedy was all about this idea of Bob Dylan, like the ghost of Bob Dylan appears at this college coffee shop. And there's these 3 musicians. And he says, I am going to choose which one of you is meant for greatness. And I'm going to tell you all the secrets about how you could be great so that you have a life of greatness. And they were like, well, how will you know? And he walks up to one of them and he's like, and he like smells them and he goes, I'll know. I'll just know. And I was like, that's pretty funny. Ha ha ha. And the next day I'm driving in the car and I'm listening to Charles Duhigg talking about his new book about super communicators. And he's talking about like the traits and the behaviors of super communicators. And immediately I thought to myself, well, in executive search, we always used to look for greatness when it wasn't already on a resume, right? Like if there is a track record that's on a resume, somebody's going to have 80% of it, maybe 90%, but never 100%. And also in a world where we don't even know what skills we're going to need next, how can you know it when you've seen it? Because we've never seen it before. So what are the skills? What are the behaviors? What are the traits that people have who we can say, we're going to de-risk this hire. We know that this is what makes people great. Anybody who has these 5 things will be great no matter where you put them. And so I started thinking about what I would tell clients about hunger, tenacity, weight, speed, and grit. And then I was like, oh, I could do that. And then I could talk to like a bunch of Fortune 100 CEOs, and I could talk to A&R record company executives, and I could talk to sports leagues, like who does the recruiting for sports league? Who do they decide who to draft? Like, what are you looking for in those people? Out, right? How do they feel? How do you know it when you see it? Like, what is the thing? And if we could demystify, so this idea popped into my head, fully formed, with even the ideas of like, these are the questions I'm going to ask in the assessment that I'm going to send out to like 1,000 Fortune 1,000 C-suite. It popped fully formed. But why? Because I was taking in all these other things and letting them just alchemize in my brain. And I figured this came to me while I was driving in the car. So I wasn't asking ChatGPT. By the way, you're like the 9th person I've told about this idea. So like, like,
I
I
said,
can't get out of my brain.
I don't even have to ask what's next. You just
There
shared
it
it
is.
with us. So there it is. I love it.
So my advice to this woman, to anybody, to us, to each of us is like, spend more time alchemizing and less time producing, and you'll actually produce more and better.
Close it. Close it. Close
Get
it.
rid of the
Don't
hurry
even,
hand.
yeah, don't feel that. Don't feel that rush, that thing that is looming over you to make you,
That
I have to
external
produce.
pressure that
Oh,
forces us towards mediocrity.
wow. That's
Yeah.
good. That's good. Okay, so I know we have to wrap up. We're a little bit over, but I want to ask you about this because I can look back on certain moments in my life and realize that moment changed everything for me. But did it? Wasn't there a moment before that that drove that moment? Right. So, in particular, I'm talking about the butterfly effect,
Yes.
which is the idea that the flap of a butterfly wings on the other side of the world changed the course of, made the wind blow a certain way, which made a boat go and whatever, right?
Yes.
So, do you have a specific butterfly moment in your life where you can look back on that and say, if that had not happened, I would not be where I am right now?
There are so many of those moments that are like sliding doors or trajectory
Yes.
shifters. Um, it all probably goes back to a bizarre set of childhood traumas of like the boy who didn't love me back when I'm in second grade, and I had to prove to everybody that I was smarter and better. And it probably
Yeah.
all goes back to that. But I would say I should give great thanks to the professor on the very first day of contracts. Of Contracts 101. Guy by the name of Jones, Professor Jones. I'm sure he's long since dead because he was like 107 at the time. And he gave everybody D's. So he said we got Jones, right? I was the
Oh my
first student who was
gosh.
called on the very first day and asked question after question after question after question until I just fell apart in a puddle of tears. And probably so much of where I am today is because of that organ rejection failure of a time at law school.
Which
Thanks
goes
to
back
him.
to, I mean, you referenced the failure and the rejection as a child, a second
Yeah.
grader. I
Oh, I
can
have
remember
big rejection issues. Big
I ha-
rejection issues.
I can remember feeling those things as a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old. I mean, my first bit of writing wasn't a poem, it was a song. I wrote a song as an 8-year-old about a boy who didn't like me, so and I think the chorus was, and it's okay, it's all right,
And
so I
it's
was telling
okay.
myself,
It's all right. I
it's
like it.
exactly right. It's exactly right on my little ukulele. I wrote it, so
Amazing.
so it is okay. It is all right. And somehow rejection formed who we are. And isn't that
Absolutely.
interesting? Isn't that interesting to
Absolutely.
think about that? Had it not been for you not liking me or you not appreciating me, maybe I wouldn't have worked so hard to
Yeah.
get to where I am.
And you can, like, I don't know if you've been back to any of your high school reunions, but
Oh yeah,
I've been back to mine. Because I did all right. So of course I want to
that's
go back
right.
to my high
That's
school
right.
reunion. It's like a comeback tour.
That's right.
So I mean I went to computer sleepaway camp when I was 13 years old. Like, and that is about as geeky as you were imagining it, right? Like it is, oh yeah, for sure. I was worth my weight in hard contact lenses and Clearasil, and I had a
That's
scoliosis
right.
brace and everything. I mean, the whole
Oh,
thing. What you were
jeez.
picturing is exactly what it was.
Romy and
And
Michelle's high school reunion.
totally. But those of us who peaked really, really late developed personality and humor and grit and resilience and storytelling and just
Right.
all
Right.
of this. And the people who were like the the head of the cheerleading squad and the captain of the football team, some of them did okay, but for the most part, they did not do as well. And
Right.
at 53, I can look back on that and be like, okay, yeah, like awesome,
I did
I get
okay.
it.
I did okay.
But that
I
to
did
my
okay.
like eighth grade self, who was sad that Sean Joseph didn't love her back with this little bowl haircut, and I was like, oh. Sad.
Yeah. Larry Rosen wouldn't kiss me.
That's just so
It is
tragic.
it is amazing how pain and suffering and rejection end up being our best friends and our superpower. They are the things
Yes.
that help us grow and become the human that we are so that we can produce work that matters to other people, because other people then see that humanness in our work and say, I identify with you. I'm going to read more about what you're doing. I'm going to buy your book. I'm going to make sure I tune in when you're on the TV show. So, you've told us what's next as far as writing. Is there anything else that's coming up?
I mean, I didn't even know the writing was coming up till a couple weeks ago.
I
All
love
of a
it.
sudden,
I
it
love it.
demanded space in
I
my
need
brain.
a ticker tape across the up next.
Man, I know. So up next, yeah. So I mean, I'm going to be doing a lot more Access Hollywood and Good Morning America and all of the, TV stuff, which is super fun to do. Yeah, I've got some conversations in the works about some possibly interesting other television stuff, but I got to keep that
Fun.
under wraps right now.
Okay, final bonus cue. Do you
Yes.
have a favorite author or favorite book that's been kind of your best friend?
Oh, Ursula Heggie wrote a book called Stones from the River. It's a fiction book, and it's a book about a dwarf in Nazi Germany, and in occupied yeah, she's in Germany, and she's basically ignored by all of the Nazi officers because she's a dwarf. They're like, "You're not a real human. We don't care about you." And so she's working in a cafe, and they're talking about all of the secrets and all the things that they're going to do. And she ends up becoming a spy for the British, and like hiding Jews and all of this stuff because they're basically ignoring her. And so she becomes this hero because they don't think that she's really, they just cast her aside. And I read that book while I was backpacking through Turkey, and I was like sitting in the back of the bus, like sobbing on this overnight bus. And all these Turks are like, who's the weird white lady? Like, what's happening? But
Wow.
The reason I love that book is because I think it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, that identity is not this fixed trait, and that you're not the person other people see. You're the person that you are, right? There's this
Right.
psychological term that says, like, you're not who you think you are, you're not who I think you are, but you're who you think I think you are. And she thwarted that. She wasn't who they thought she was. And so this idea that we all have personal agency, even in the worst of times, has just sort of always stuck with me.
I love it. I love it. Laura Gassner Otting, thank you so much for joining me today, for being my guest on Real Words, and just shining your light. I can't wait to buy your next book, and
I can't wait to write it.
Have it inspire me. Well, it's there. That's how it happens. It's there, and it's waiting to come out onto the screen. So
thanks for having me, Rayanne. This was super fun.
Absolute pleasure. We'll see you all next time on Real Words. Thanks for tuning in. This episode was made possible by Never Enough Media.